Tie and slur. What are they basically? You have learned about staff, clef, note, rest, time signature. Between notes, you sometimes see these curvy little lines. It could be this way or that way. They're called different names because they have different effects. One is called a slur. You know, when you're talking, you go slurring like this and you don't articulate. Nobody understands what you're saying. A tie is to tie, let's say, two strings together and make it longer. So those are just images for you to remember what those words may mean. And here we get into the details. A tie is a little curvy line between two notes. They can be of any value. If they are exactly the same pitch, this is called a tie. What does this mean? It means that you are making a sound at the beginning of it, and then you just hold it on. The equivalent number of beats here would be 3. So you make ta, just as you would make for the dotted half note, ta. And if it's between two notes that are not the same, let's say this one is lower, then that same curvy line is now called a slur. And it simply means that you are making it smooth. Da, instead of da, da. On a hymnal, it means that most of the time you would be dealing with one single syllable. Let's take a real example with the word Alleluia. There are 4 syllables in that word, and we have 4 examples here. It would be easy for you to identify that the first slur is a slur. Those 2 notes are not the same. The second is a tie. Continuing on the first line, the first is the slur, and the second is a tie. But what does that mean when you're singing? Let's take a pitch as as you notice, I took the same vowel and changed pitched on them because there's no other syllable written since it's a slur. And that's how the first example would go. The second example, in this second example, the ya is the one that needs to stretched out. The first example, the le, is the syllable that needs to stretched out for 4 beats. On the second line now, a slur can also slur over many notes, such as this example of the word, the syllable ah, going for 4 different notes going down. Rest, rest, because that is a half rest. And finally, the last example, the first curvy line is a, yes, it is a slur, and the second curvy line down here is a, and yes, it is a tie. And this is how we would sing. The word ah has to change pitch here, and then change pitch again for the le. The lu will be stretched for 4 beats, and then ya as well. And that would be an example of how tie and slur would appear on a real hymnal. As you notice, instead of writing this tie with the lu, we could have written just simply a whole note. That is possible. So let's erase this and write a whole note. Next, we will learn about repeat signs. There are several ones presented to you in Unit 4. One is just to simply repeat a few bars or a few measures. The simplest repeat sign is a double bar line with the 2 dots, as you could see at the end of bar 4. That means that when you get to that bar, you have to repeat from the beginning. So if you had to sing this, it would be fa, sol, sol, mi, fa, mi. Repeat. Fa, sol, sol, mi, fa, mi, re, do. After I repeat the second time, I would sing the last 2 bars. That's a simple repeat sign. There are other ways to repeat. As you can see from the second example, in the second example, you could see that there is a dotted and then also another dotted opposite direction. What that means is that you will sing bar 1, bar 2, bar 3, bar 4, and then would not repeat from the beginning, but repeat from the other 2 dots, opposing dots. So then you would repeat bar 2, bar 3, bar 4, and then continue the last 2 bars. So if the exercise was to ask you not to sing, but to rewrite this exercise as if you were singing it, that means that you would have to sing this note, and then bar 2, and then sing the bar 3 with a whole note, and then sing bar 4, then go back to bar 2, which is this one, and bar 3, and bar 4 once more, and then I would need 2 more bars, and I'm lacking another bar, but that would be the idea. So I'm missing 1 more bar here to write. So when you see opposite dots, it means repeat it from the other dot. If the dot again is missing, just as in the first example, that means just repeat it from the beginning. And so this gives you the type of question that could be asked for me to know that you understood how this song should go. The same could be said about this melody. In this one, it's very simple. Do you notice any pattern that repeats? Do you notice that bar 1 and bar 3 are of the same notes? Bar 2 and 4 are the same notes. But, oh, look at that. Bar 3 and the last bar are not the same notes. So we do discover that 2 of those bars are repeating, but then they have different ending. The word is ending. Thus, if you had to show to me how to read and the fact you understood this, you'd be singing bar 1, then you would be singing bar 2, and then you would be singing bar 3. Now, how do I repeat these first 2 bars without using more measures? I can actually group all these 6 measures into only 4 measures. So I have to use repeat signs. Because I have different endings, that means that I could create an ending. I'm sorry, I put it in the wrong place. It should be here. That would be my first ending. And the repeat sign should not be there. It should actually be here. So I was in the wrong bar. So now you could see that that is ending number 1. And the last ending that I should be singing would be a C. And that should be my second ending. And labeled as such. So now you could see that I sing from the beginning, the G, then the G and the E, and then I sing the D, Oops, I see these two dots. It means I have to return to the beginning, the G, and the E. But this time around, I will skip the first ending because I sung it already, and I will sing the C. So reading this particular type of writing with first and second ending is the same as to see it all written out, taking 6 measures. And finally, the last example. In this example, you have 8 bars that you can be rewriting with some repeat signs for, say, under 6 bars. So notice the patterns are repeat, and that will give you the answer. And here's the answer. You would sing bar 1, bar 2, bar 3, bar 4. At this point, you notice that bar 3 and 4 are repeating. So I need a repeat sign there. And what do I repeat? Only 2 bars. I need another repeat sign. And here's my last 2 bars. And that will be it. I have rewritten a melody of 8 bars into 2 bars. If you would like to try out these examples again on your own without the answer given, they are printed out and they are in the yellow envelope outside of my office. Let's practice some rhythm. As you have seen perhaps in your Unit 4 already, we have rest equivalent to the 8th note. We talked a little bit about this last class. The rest in question looks like a number 7 as seen on the last bar here. Let's try to clap the first line together, and here is how fast I would like you to go. Here we go. Ta, 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 ta. 3 beats. Ta, 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 ta. Ti, ti, ta, ti, ti, ta. Notice that I use the word t, just the T, very softly to express the rest of the 8th notes. So I'm pretending that there are 2 notes there, the TT, except one of them is kind of quiet. Shall we do that last 2 bars, those last 2 bars, starting on the 4 quarter notes again? The last 2 bars of the first line. Here we go. Ta, 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 ta. Ti, ti, ta, ti, ti, ta. Did you get that? Try to follow along. So now, observing the second line, I have written out all the syllables you need to say. Notice that the T, 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 T follow in a row, and it's possible to link all the 8th notes together like that, as well as just seeing them 2 by 2. We also have talked about this last class. And notice on the second bar of the second line that again you have a T and a T. And on the third bar you have 2/8 rest. The equivalent of 2/8 rest is 1 whole beat. Therefore, you can say in your mind T, T. And then and so forth. The most difficult bar, I have to warn you, is the last one, because among your TT, the first one is the one that needs to be quiet. The first one is T, T, ta. So let's rehearse that quiet T and followed by the T. Instead of T, T, ta, you have T, T, ta. So let's try to clap now or sing the second line. 1, 2, here we go. Ta, ta, ti, 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 ta, ti, ti, ta, ti, ti, ta, t, ta, 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 ti, ti, ta, ti, ti, ta, ta, ti, ta. Was that hard? Let's try to start one more time, but let's focus on starting on the second bar. 1, 2, from the second bar. Ta, ti, t, ta, ti, ti, ta, t, t, ta, 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 ti, ti, ta, ti, t, ta, ta, t, ti, ta. And if you're really good at it, let's do it one more time. Really keep your t quiet inside of your mind. Almost no sound except in your mind. Those quiet in parentheses t. From the beginning of the second line. 1, 2, here we go. Ta, ta, ti, 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 ta, ti, ta, ti, ti, ta, 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 ti, ti, ta, ti, ta, ta, ti, ta. Did you get that last bar? That was quite hard. Let's do the last bar again of that line. 1, 2, here we go. Ta, ta, ti, ta. Good. Now let's move on. You can practice again without the other syllables. Let's see if you could do it without the other syllables. The only difficult place is I've already put the syllables in for you. It's the same line that you just did. You don't have the syllables to look at, that's all. Here we go. Here we go. Ta, ta, ti, 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 ta, ti, ta, ti, ti, ta, 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 ti, ti, ta, ti, ta, ta, ti, ta. This sheet will also be on my office door for you to practice some more. Here's a new one. Kind of the same thing except you have more rest in them. So look at all the rest plays. All the syllables are given to you. Try to follow along. The ta, the half note. There's one half note in there. Oh, this is a slightly more difficult level. Here we go. Here we go. Ta, rest. Ta, ti, 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 ta, rest, rest. Ta, ta, ti, ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, ti, 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 ta. If you're able to do that with me the first time, you're really good. You must have been practicing with me, Smart Music. Otherwise, do go and practice with Smart Music, please. Let's do it one more time, but let's focus from the ending, and then we're going to add the bar before. So let's do the last bar. Here we go. Ta, t, ti, ti, ta. One more time, the last bar. Here we go. Ta, t, ti, ti, ta. Good job. Now let's try the bar before that. The one with t, 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 ta, that one. Ready? Here we go. T, 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 ta, That's right. Now let's move backwards again to the third bar. And here we go. Ta, ta, ti, ta. We've seen that bar before in the previous example. Let's do that third bar again. Here we go. Ta, ta, ti, ta. Good job. Now, let's try it one more time from the beginning. 1, 2, here we go. Ta, rest. Ta, ti, 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 ta, rest, rest. Ta, ta, ti, ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, ti, 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 ta. Good try at that. If you like to pick up this copy and follow along with the video and practice with me again, that would be a good idea for your midterm. Now, the last one, those ties that we've talked about, sometimes they show up. This is a very easy example where the tie is simply prolonging your quarter notes into half notes, right? Let's try this example now. 1, 2, ready, go. Ta, ti, 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 ta. Ta, ti, 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 rest. Ta, ti, 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 ta, ti, ta, 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 rest. Let's continue with some clapping, but with ties. Here's how ties could be complicated. If they are tying, for example, from a weak beat to a strong beat, such as this one, or it's something you don't expect. So let's suppose that all of these curvy lines are ties. That means you are not going to play or sing or clap that note, and you are not going to sing or make a sound on that note. You're simply prolonging the quarter note to be longer and prolonging, in this case, the eighth notes to be longer. So let's try to clap this one. We are in a 4/4. 1, 2, here we go. Ta, ti, ti, ta, ti, ta, Did you get that? Let's try it again. Ta, ti, ti, ta, ti, ta, Now, the second line. What if my ties were, again, from here to here? No, let's not do that. What if my ties cross over a bar line like this? In this case, you would not be making any sound for this one. So basically, if we clap this, 1, 2, 3, go. Ta, ta, ti, ti, ta, ta. Let's try that one more time. Ta, ta, ti, ti, ta, ta. So what does that mean when we're putting words into or lyrics into a melody such as this one? It means we cannot put a new syllable on those X'd notes because it's simply coming from the previous sound, prolonging it. So now the third example, the third line. If I had this, I would be, therefore, singing and not doing anything here. And I would be singing. Here we go. Ta, ti, ta, And in music, we will learn that instead of this tied note being X'd over, we can have a fairy come and reduce that little note into a dot. And therefore, this line, line number 3, is exactly the same sound, the same rhythm as this line, line number 4. Line number 4, here we go. Ta, ti, ta. Whenever you see something that looks like line number 4, and think of it as line number 3 with a silent T. This is the dotted quarter note, and it's talked about in your lesson 17. One more time. Ready, go. Line number 4. Ta, ti, ta. Let's take a long pattern with some difficulties in them. In the first line, bar 2, you could see a tie. And if we continue to the next tie, that difficulty, it's because you're tying across a bar line, and that could cause some problems for some people. Let's notice also the 2/8 rest, that is equivalent to 1 beat. And then in the last bar of the first line, one can see the 8th rest, which is supposed to be t silently in your head at this point. Let's try to clap this first line. Here's the beat. Here we go. Ta, 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 ti, ta, rest. Ti, 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 rest. Ta, ta, rest. Ta, rest. Ti, ta, rest. That was a bit harder, wasn't it? So let's practice those bars that were difficult, starting backwards with the last bar of the first line. Here we go. Ta, ti, ta, rest. Good. Let's now make that 8th rest really silent in our heads only. So I don't even want to hear the t. Here we go. Ta, ti, ta, rest. Good job. And now the other difficulty probably is bar 2. Let's do bar 2. Here we go. Ta, ti, ta, rest. If you have difficulty with that, you might want to do a silent T, but very silently. Here we go. Let's try that. Ta, ti, ta, rest. But ultimately, what happens is that you would only have one syllable for 1 beat and a half. Let's take, for example, the syllable got. Then the next syllables you can write in would be only for that T. Let's add a few syllables here. And it doesn't make sense, but just for practicing purposes, let's try this with the syllable written there. So you could see with the tie, the first tie, that T that is tied in has no syllables on it. 1, 2, with the words. Glory to God in the... And that's how it would be. Let's now look at the second line. You will see that most bars are the same. In fact, bar 1 is exactly the same, and bar 2, though it looks different, is exactly the same as well, because the dotted quarter note is equivalent to a quarter note tied to an 8th note. And so if we had to put syllables as well, you will see that it's exactly falling at the same time. So let's sing the first 2 bars of line 2. Here we go. Ta, 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 ti, ta, rest. If we took the syllables, it would be, here we go. Glory to God in the... Good job. Let's look now at the next 2 bars. You notice on line 1 we only have one tie. The only thing I did was to replace the quarter note, this quarter note on line 1, with 2/8 notes on line 2 that are tied together, but they should sound the same. So let's say that we put a word to this note. We cannot put any syllables to the tied note. For line 2, it would sound exactly the same because we cannot put any syllables for all these tied notes. We're not supposed to make any sound in them, just prolonging. A tie prolongs the value of a note. So if we had to do bar 3, whether you're looking at line 1 or line 2, it would sound like, with the TTs and the TAs, 1, 2, here we go, bar 3. T, 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 ta, ta, rest. And now with the words, some TTs and the word end piece, here we go. T, 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 and peace. That's right. Notice when I sing the piece, I held it for 2 beats, and I put the s at the end when the rest comes. That is a practice in choir that is often used, 99.99%. So you might as well learn that consonants at the end of a word is usually put at the end of that value. So the word peace ends right there on that beat. Where there's a rest, you put that s. Let's try it one more time. Bar 3 and 4. 1, 2, here we go. T, 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 rest. And peace. Continue. Ta, ti, ta, rest. I don't know if you were looking at line number 2, but I was looking at line number 2 because if you compare the last bar between the 2 lines, are they exactly the same? Do they sound exactly the same? If you answered no, you are correct. Why is that? Not a quarter with another 8th note is not the same length as a quarter with a rest. Let me do the first line. Last bar of the first line would be ta, ti, ta. And now the second line, last bar, would be, here we go, ta, ti, ta. It's smoother, right? You can probably hear it better if we put a word to it that has, let's say, a 2-syllable word. Let's say we say glory again. I know it doesn't make sense, but right now I can't think of anything. So exactly the same syllables. Here's how different they would sound. On the first line, last bar. 1, 2, here we go. Glory God. And the second line, last bar, would be, here we go. Glory God. Yes, I'm supposed to do the d of the God at the rest only. So let's do it one more time. Line 1, last bar. Glory God. And line 2, last bar, would be smoother, where you're linking the word glory together. Glory God. Now, let's try the whole line 2. And when there are no words in there, just do the TTs. 1, 2, here we go. Glory to the